Hi, my name's Love. It's been a minute. I haven't been on here in it's been some time. I think my last video I was living in New York. Now you don't need to know, but I'm in my own two-bedroom apartment and in a completely new city. It was exactly what I wanted. Leaving New York was something that was still city-like, yet a more slow down pace for me to recuperate, to ground myself, and have this space to retreat, to be intentional about this next journey that I want to venture off on, and to get very clear on what that looks like. As if you don't know, some of you may know, we're in the year of the horse. So it feels to me spiritually what I'm grasping from that as we've left the year of the snake, which was a lot of shedding and transformation and the death of old identities and a lot of death and rebirth. As we get into the year of the horse, it seems like a lot of clarity coming in on the direction and path that we want to go on, and making it ours, doing it as authentically as we can do it. And this move that I made was exactly what was needed for me to shed, to transform, and to get clear on that direction that I'm going on. Not only just with purpose or career, but also with who I keep around me, who's allowed into my space, who not worth, sometimes I don't like saying like who's worth my time or energy to be around. That sounds very like ego driven at times, but truly who is exactly what I need in my corner and my space for the path that I'm on. So with all that being said, I'm back. And I've decided that I'm going to attempt to commit to at least one video a week where I'm transforming my Substack writings into these video essays to give to y'all. And today's one is about forgiveness. I recently just got out of a relationship, probably not even a month ago, maybe exactly a month ago. And something that my ex left on me that eventually dawned on me, it literally did not leave my mind, especially once I moved into my own space, was that I'm not forgiving. And in the moment that they mentioned that, I said something like, I'm not. And instead of feeling shame, because I think when we talk about forgiveness in the ways that it's portrayed in society and how it's placed on us, whether it's culturally or just in therapy, or how we hear about it in social media, how social media aestheticizes it, there's normally a lot of shame and guilt. I feel like that comes if you don't want to forgive, or if you're having a hard time forgiving. It makes you seem angry, it makes you seem bitter, it makes it seem like you have a hard time letting things go. But there was something really peaceful, freeing, when I realized that I'm not forgiving. It made me think about some separations that I've had with very intimate and significant connections in my own life, where I'm at least thought I forgive. And I realized even in some of those situations, outside of even those connections platonically with people that were significant to me, even with my own family, specifically my mother, or even my siblings, relatives, people who have crossed something sacred for me, because that's what forgiveness, I've realized, indicates to me. Forgiveness and pain are birthed from the same wound, and is that it's something sacred has been crossed. And at times, something sacred has been crossed, yet not named, not held, not touched. So with that realization, as I'm sitting with it, I was realizing that this is something very freeing. I feel very at peace with realizing in this situation and in others that I'm not forgiving. in that just because even in certain situations I can be forgiving, doesn't mean that I have to abandon my truth of what I experience. I've realized at times in most situations, if not all, that I'm a very accepting person. Once I hit a point, I can realize this is what you can do, this is what has occurred, this is who you are. I can accept that and move accordingly. Forgiveness requires, to me, a level of things to occur. Pain and truth to be named without minimizing it or making it palatable, making it digestible. And then after it's named, it requires for it to be touched and held. And then afterwards, it's obviously repair. And I think without those things, forgiveness shouldn't be something that is given. And I think we see it in society as forgiveness is something demanded of us. And I really felt it so beautiful with the realization that this is not a demand, this is my choice. Forgiveness should be a choice. Let me set the pillow up. Forgiveness should be a choice, not something that's demanded and not something that is automatically granted after something has been crossed. Without those things, without it being named, without it being honored, touched, held, nurtured, and without there being some form of repair followed after all of that. And yes, this is all of my thoughts as I am post-breakup and really sitting in my own space that I wrote a whole Substack about it. And I will end up dropping these things in the link in my bio from my TikTok, which you'll get the same kind of vibe, just in a more stand-up, sporadic kind of way. You don't get the whole, you might catch the vibe, you might get the aesthetic, but I'll link my TikTok and Substacks and social medias that you can find me on and find this type of content that if you find it enjoyable, you'll get it a lot on these other platforms, a lot more consistently than just me committing to one time a week. But this is a part of my year of the horse goal, is to at least commit to writing, because my writing influences and informs what I post on YouTube and on other platforms. So that holds me accountable of committing to writing, but at least committing to a video once a week. So before I get into all that, I just wanted to state that, along with the next couple of videos will be video essays from my Substack posts. The next one is going to be about desires and preferences and sexuality, and how sometimes our desires and preferences are rooted in trauma or passed down scripts that don't even resonate in our bodies, yet they take residence. Outside of that, another thing that has influenced this video, along with what I've written about not forgiving and not wanting to forgive, is that if you don't know, I'm in online school getting my bachelor's in sociology. This past term was all about cultural anthropology. And as I was studying this term, I was realizing how I asked questions was starting to be changed, transformed. And as I'm realizing that in anthropology, there's almost like these subcategories of, most times, sections, or I should say of a specific topic. Like we go from gender, there's like subcategories where you can ask these questions. Who gets to morally, so there's moral, if I'm not mistaken, this is relativism. So there's moral relativism, there's cultural relativism, there is language relativism, there is, what else was there? I hope I'm pronouncing this right, epistemological relativism. There's another form of relativism that I might be leaving out, but overall, you can ask these questions from these lens. So culturally, if we're talking about gender, how does gender vary across cultures? Does every culture have the same perspective on genders? How is gender roles expressed, displayed within this type of culture or that type of culture? Morally, we get into the right and wrong. We can say, I want to just mainly focus that we can dive now when we start applying that moral, relativistic, if that even is a word, I'd be making up stuff as a Pisces, framework or lens on something. Is it right? Is it wrong? And then you can kind of blend that right into the cultural aspect and like what cultures is it viewed as wrong, what cultures is it viewed as right, and why. When we start getting into the epistemological lens of gender, we start talking about just like the knowing and knowledge of who defines gender, who defines queerness, who defines transness, and who gets to say of that. In some cultures it's society, and some some cultures it's society, and others it's institutions, and others there's the culture itself, these group of people, and someone else's world it's the person themselves defining themselves. And then when we get into the language lens, language relativism, we start to ask these questions about what words that are out there define gender, who has access to that information, in the language, because now we're getting into how language can influence what a person knows, but also how a person's able to express themselves. So not only what labels and words are out there for someone to identify themselves with, but also now we can go on the whole opposite side of that and talk about how are these words doing more injustice than justice? Is it doing more harm? Is it restricting? Are they limiting? Are they freeing? So that's kind of where this whole thing started to, not this whole thing started, but how this subject that I read was also influenced by my culture and anthropology class. So I started to ask, who does forgiveness benefit, and in what world, and does it look different across people, bodies, genders, sexuality? Is forgiveness gendered? And with that being said, 15 minutes later, this is I Don't Want to Forgive. So, like I already mentioned, post-breakup, I'm realizing that I haven't forgive. I'm realizing I don't want to forgive in this particular situation. And there's something freeing that kind of is like this freeing, ominous energy spirit that I feel like I came in contact with that was like, hey, you don't have to. That's perfectly fine. And also realizing I'm in this middle phase of still feeling what I just experienced with my last partner, and that I also don't have to rush to get to any point. And I think we see that in society. We want to rush to get to the good part of the story, the good part of the movie. We all want a life where everything just looks right. And we all want to get to a point of our lives where everything's good. And I think we forget, before I dive in to that, I want to say, not only just the good part of life and the good part of our own stories, but we even do it with healing. Just trying to be over and done with it all. And I think we forget that the essence of life, the juice of the berry, is all in the middle. It's within this uncertainty. It's within not knowing. It's that uncomfortable, transformative space that we exist in from time to time in many different periods of our lives, whether we're in an actual transitionary period where we're moving, or a change of jobs, locations, overall environment, whatever the case may be. It's that space of not knowing, of uncertainty, where the wisdom of life exists, where the juice of the berry, the essence, is the thing we're constantly yearning for. It's right there. And what I was realizing too is that I can move through this wave that I'm in. I actually don't need to move within the wave. I don't have to swim with the wave. I can actually sit in the middle of the ocean. I can, lay on my back and stay right here, and that is okay. And like I mentioned early on, that I realized that I accept more than I can give. I think about acceptance, and I believe it's SZA Mom in one of her songs. I don't know if it's Supermodel, it might be Supermodel. But where her mom is saying, like, when I can realize that this is the best that you can do, I can finally let it go. And I've definitely applied that to many different situations, if not all, that once I realize and have accepted within myself that this is who you are, this is how you exist, and this is how you choose to live, and this is what you plan to do, and this is what you'll continue on doing, I can finally let it go. And I can move forward, and I can detach without allowing these heavy feelings to reside in my body and move me in a way that imbalances me. I want y'all to see. I had to turn this around because I want y'all to get this visual of this candle. I'm obsessed with how it melted. It's beautiful, and it's only on one side. Anyways, so after I'm sitting with that, I'm realizing that forgiveness looks different on different bodies. It looks different on men, and it looks different on women. It looks different on queer people. It looks different on the emotionally expressive partner. And that's where my cultural anthropology class starts coming into place, because I started to sit with the fact that I don't think I've ever realized or seen any men forgive in my family or who I've been around. And I feel like it normally takes a lot for men in society, because I'm not going to apply it to all men. I'm going to say men in society. I'm going to say men under the guise of the patriarchy. There's a more toxic, egoic, unhealthy, role that they take on, where men normally don't sit within that space of forgiveness and expressing such. And I think it mainly has to do with forgiveness that's require vulnerability. To extend at someone that's very vulnerable, that leaves you open, especially if it's to reconnect and repair, to get hurt again, to love again. And those things exist without control. And it's something you don't have control over, and it's inevitable. So I've never witnessed any men that I've been around extend forgiveness. I have seen women, and I think we see it in movies, you can see the woman, and it even looks different on queer people. We'll get into that in a minute. But it looks different on women, queer people, and the emotionally expressive partner, but they interconnect. They're more on the same side, but it just varies greatly from men. And when it comes to that, I was realizing, we see it in movies. The woman forgiving, and that is like the doorway, the portal that the man gets granted, this key to the door back into her life. It's more of a benefit at times to the man than the woman, or the queer person, or the emotionally expressive partner. And queer people, I feel like it, we have this relationship with seeing, how it varies and how it normally benefits the other more than ourselves with our family. We're constantly told to forgive, even at the expense of not being accepted, even at the expense of being disrespected, even at the expense of not being fully heard or seen or understood. We are told to forgive. So that's where I was sitting with that. This looks different, and not everyone gets the same or have the same relationship with forgiveness. And forgiveness sometimes benefits the other more than this other group of people. And along with that, I realized how it exists even outside of, it's still relating to people, but in a different framework. So outside of maybe love or family or friends, we can even see how it plays out in jobs. So we forgive to keep the family gathering. We forgive to keep the workplace functioning and producing. We forgive to keep the relationship persisting. We forgive to, at times, not shake the table, to not name our truths out of a fear that will rupture something. And along with these thoughts, the next continuing thing and realization that I'm having within reflection is how sacred being angry is. It's actually something extremely sacred. And, and it's not meaning you're just out here acting wildly, but when you allow yourself to feel anger without rushing to feed it a bottle, put the blanket over it or comfort it, but you allow it to exist. And it was like I was allowing myself to be angry, and I can see, and not even see, I can feel where it resides in my body. And I describe in the Substack this warm feeling that radiates through. And, as with any emotions, how you go about expressing it is extremely important. And I think at some time it's required for you to just speak your truth. And then there's other times where you might put it into a craft or creative or a creation of yours. And other times, some things you just sit with and sit with it as long as you need for it to then pass. And that's perfectly fine. There's no right way of doing anything. But during reflecting on how sacred anger is, I kept thinking of the deity, the goddess, Kalima, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, but the goddess of destruction and time, and how she cuts right through illusions. And as I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking of the phrase, you can cut the tension in the room with a knife, and I'm like, that's anger, that's sacred anger. It's when tension and uncomfortability, this inner knowing that something is not just right or how it's being crossed becomes visible. And it's cutting the tension with a knife and being like, hey, let's divide it and boom, we should touch this. It's like when it's 100 degrees outside and you can see the heat waves emitting from the sun, and you see the sand after the ocean, the waters has washed upon it repeatedly. It's that form of clarity. That's what I'm initially getting to. It is clarity. And I thought that was something really beautiful as I was reflecting, that like we're taught in society that don't be bitter, don't be angry, let it go. It's too heavy. Don't let it be heavy. Don't let it weigh so much on you. And I'm like, what's wrong with being angry? I'm not going to say be bitter, but what's wrong with feeling these things? Why are we always rushing to the good part? To the end of the story? And it's really, at times, regarding forgiveness, it's really how anger, even that uncomfortable, tense, heavy, weighted, I want to say all of these things that society describes anger as, these nasty, disgusting, unattractive, not pleasurable, not digestible feelings in space that we can exist, and we just want to wrap it up in a present and store it. Or we just want to ignore it and suppress it and just get to the good part. And I was realizing that too, how anger, outside of forgiveness, anger even looks different on different bodies. Men, at times, when they're angry, we hear people say that's attractive, that's sexy, that's hot, it's protective almost. Sometimes it's like, oh, that's very scary. But in other times, it almost has this positive meaning behind it. It's sexy, oh, that was hot. But when we see it on women, on queer bodies, it's like, this is nasty, this is unattractable, they're unstable, this is just, no, steer clear, away. And that was a funny realization I was having too, and I think that's been my connection with forgiveness and also anger. Because no one likes when the person is cutting the tension in the room with the knife. It's better to keep things underneath the table or to sweep them or ignore them, because why? We want to keep gathering. And sometimes we want access to connections without shaking things up. And we want to keep our jobs. and we want to keep things intact. But at what cost? And who does that benefit? And in what world is that the world you want to live in? That's where I was sitting at within all of this. And overall realizing that forgiveness should be a choice, not something that's demanded, a choice. And now I'm realizing maybe I am, maybe I'm not, maybe other people. The purpose of this video is maybe someone needs to hear this right now. Maybe someone feels exactly how I felt before or is feeling it right now. But I don't know if I'm creating a new meaning or a way for it, but it's exactly that. Forgiveness isn't something that should be demanded. Forgiveness should be a choice. There's a level of autonomy that's there, a level of freedom that's there. Even saying that phrase alone, forgiveness should be a choice, not a demand. Sounds so freeing when you realize that it is yours, especially if you're extending the forgiveness, that is something for you to come to the conclusion of, this is what I want to do. And if you don't, that is also okay. Something wrong doesn't mean that your healing has stopped. It doesn't mean that you're just angry and bitter and nasty. But it's an honoring of your truth. And like I said, there should be a restoration of dignity and care that is initially there before you are extending forgiveness to someone. And society makes it seem like you should give it because it's the morally correct thing to do. Once again, who does that benefit and in what world? And a lot of these things were constantly projected out at us that we consume. And eventually you start seeing how it influences the way you think and how you deal with your emotions and then the actions that you take. So I realized at times too that I have definitely just extended forgiveness to keep the peace, to keep things intact. But without honoring that, hey, there has been something really sacred, significant, important to me that has been crossed. And it needs to be touched, it needs to be held, it needs to be honored. And if that's not the case, and I don't forgive, because that is the most that's the highest form of self-betrayal to me. It is not honoring one's truth. I even drag that into people not being authentically themselves due to social constructs or the scripts that they've been told and passed down from generations that you might have picked up and subconsciously, consciously consumed to the point that it literally governs your body, your existence. The highest form of self-betrayal is not honoring your truth. I think not honoring your truth is not being yourself, essentially. And overall, within all of this, I'm realizing that it's okay to not do such. I'm realizing essentially that I don't want to. I don't want to forgive, and that's okay. Being right here is perfectly fine. Being within that space is perfectly fine. It's once I had that realization was also like when I can finally let go of what occurred. And still being like, hey, that mattered, it happened. But I'm taking my choice. I'm making my choice by honoring my truth. And honoring my truth in this way is me walking away. And that too is a form of healing. So, that is, it's a video essay of I don't want to forgive. And like I mentioned within the video, maybe you feel like this. Maybe you learned something new. Maybe you have felt like this before. Maybe you're feeling like this now. I hope I gifted you something that you can take away from the video. And like I mentioned, I'm going to put my Substack below along with my TikTok and Instagram. That's where I'm most likely consistently posting I'll also drop ways that you can support along with my email for those who may want to reach out. I think I've said this before in my previous videos, but I do coaching. Some people call it transformative coaching, some people call it life coaching, some people call it authenticity coaching. But I'll drop my email because if you are seeking that, that is something you can seek through that. But yes, I'm back. I'm gonna commit to posting 1 time a week. Not for you, but for me. And yeah, love y'all.